All right, so let's get started. In the channel chat, again, is a Dropbox link. You are welcome to download those files now or later. I'm not going to move them or delete them. And they're kind of useful for if you want to either follow along, although I'll be going fairly fast, or if you want to look at the video that DoSpace will post of this on Facebook for you to refer to and kind of use it as a free exercise. So this stuff will be available for you to use and help you learn this program. Again, you don't have to, it's there for if you want it. So today we are going to look at Photoshop, and what we're going to look at is a particular hat that Photoshop wears, because Photoshop wears a lot of hats that's designed for photography. So like you can also do 3D work in here if you really want to. You can do video work. It's also good for painting and illustration, although there's better programs out there than this one for that. Also for a little context, my name is Rikin Pafal, and I teach art and graphic design over at Iowa Western, and I've got a master's degree in fine art. So I've been around the block on this kind of software. And as we go along, if there's something that you want to know, go ahead and post it in chat and I will answer it right away. Try to not use the question and answer feature because I don't see it as quickly as the chat one. And there will also be about 5-10 minutes at the end reserved for questions for you guys as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to come up here. I've got Photoshop open already. When you open up Photoshop for the first time, it'll actually probably look just like this. You also have like a Your Work version where it's going to tie into these cloud features that Adobe's pushing pretty hard right now. They're there. I don't really use them except for the Lightroom stuff a little bit. So if you want to integrate that, that's fine. And then also if you go to Home, which I'm not going to click on because I've got a bunch of political stuff that I've been working on, it will display files that you've recently worked on. So in Photoshop, you can either start by creating a new document, or you can open an existing document. For photographers, the thing that you're almost always going to do is actually open a new document. So I'm going to go ahead and click Open. I could also always come up here and go to File, Open, or I can hit Command or Control O on my keyboard. This is one of the things that's really kind of interesting about Photoshop, is that there's always like 50 ways to do the same thing. So like I could also drag it into Photoshop. I could double click on it on my desktop. There's just a million ways to do what we're doing. So let me dig through my files real quick and get to my Photoshop stuff. And we'll go ahead and start with the one labeled regular editing. I'm going to click Open. So notice, by the way, that this isn't a JPEG file. This is what we call a CR2 file. And so a CR2 file, for photographers who will know this already, it's a special file that a camera will produce called a RAW file. And let me just make sure that it's showing. It is not. So I'm going to switch my screen a little bit. So it will display the screen that I'm seeing right now. For some reason, it doesn't like to display the thing that we're in right now, which is Adobe Camera Raw. So share, you get this stuff out of your guys' line of sight, just to make your lives a little bit easier so you can see what's going on. And we'll go ahead and zoom out. So this is Adobe Camera Raw. And so it's a program that's within Photoshop that's designed for editing and processing these special camera formats. So like if you're shooting Nikon, it will be a .nef. If you're shooting Fuji, it's .raf. Canon is .cr2 or CR3. They've got a couple of them laying around, and there's other formats out there. And they're not going to be usable or editable by most normal programs. So something like Photoshop and Lightroom or Capture One or Affinity Photo are optimized to work with these files. And there's a lot that's really cool and neat about these files. I'm not going to get too far into Adobe Camera Raw just because, like, if you're already familiar with Lightroom, it's pretty much the same concept. And then a lot of these things over here are relatively self-explanatory. So, you know, like if you just want to brighten it, you come over to exposure and you can brighten it. So like, yeah, let's go ahead and brighten this one in here. Why not? So we'll go ahead and bump this up by about a stop. The thing that's really important in Adobe Camera Raw is how it gets brought into Photoshop from Camera Raw. So Camera Raw has a bunch of additional information in it, and some of that information will be discarded no matter what you do when you bring it into Photoshop. But the default settings for when it brings it into Photoshop discards quite a bit more information than it has to. So right here across the bottom, where mine's already set up to bring it in pretty hardcore, it'll say something like sRGB 8-bit for you. You'll want to click on that, and you're going to want to change these settings. So you'll come down from general and you'll go down to workflow, and where it says space, you'll want to pick either Adobe RGB or Pro Photo RGB. These are color spaces, and color spaces is like how much or what is the available range of color for your file. Pro Photo is the largest one, which sounds like, yes, let's use this. But it isn't always the one to use, in part because it's made up of 10% of colors that don't exist. They're just there in the math. And then nobody's computer screen can actually display Pro Photo RGB. But for people who are going to be doing a lot of printing, it can be very good. For people who are just starting out, my recommendation is to go ahead and just use Adobe RGB, because a lot of higher end computer screens and nicer Macs will have full coverage of this color space. And it matches up pretty closely with a lot of printer papers, so you won't have as many color conversion problems later. Another good one, like if you're just never going to be printing, I would actually recommend switching to leaving it in sRGB. sRGB is a small universal color format that's designed to be very shareable. So like you don't have to worry about it going onto somebody's screen who can't display Adobe RGB, and there being a lot of problems. And I know that's kind of like, it's kind of like a confusing topic, but basically Pro Photo RGB, once you're very comfortable in Photoshop, and then if you're going to be doing a lot of printing, Adobe RGB is very good. If you're never going to be printing, only displaying on the internet, go ahead and leave it in sRGB. In my case, since my recommendation for you guys to go ahead and be to do Adobe RGB 1998. The other thing that it'll be default set to is 8 bits per channel. And this is another one of those big parts of this color space topic that I'm not going to get too deep into, but basically it's how many steps are there in between colors. So like if my color space is my range of colors, my bit depth is how many little steps there are in between those colors. And so like if you see posterization or those kind of weird pixely effects that happen in like clear blue skies in photos, that's often related to bit depth. So I would go ahead and drop it to 16 bits to increase it to 16 bits to give yourself more steps. And that way when you're editing, it's less destructive to your image and it will end up looking better at the end. That said, when we export to JPEG, it will automatically get converted to 8-bit for being shared on the internet. So it's not a huge deal for like sharing later, but it'll look better if you do it this way. Although that said, 16-bit is a little disingenuous because there aren't any cameras that are 16-bit. Early DSLRs are going to be like 10-bit, and the nicer ones that are out there today, I think, are 14-bit. Don't quote me on those numbers. This is what I'm recalling. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I'm ready to convert this raw file into a regular raster file for editing in Photoshop. So I'll go ahead and click Open down here. And again, I would come through and play with these later, but it's very much like Lightroom. And so since it's not unique to Photoshop, we're going to focus on some of the unique things that you'll actually want to be using Photoshop for in this program. So let's start by talking about your workspace. My workspace is going to look a little different from yours right now. Let me reset the share so you don't have all this extra junk sitting around there. There we go. You can open up questions and answers again without you guys having to stare at them. There we go. So my space is going to look a little different from yours. So I'm going to go ahead and set it up to look just like what yours should look like when you first open Photoshop. So yours probably looks something like this. So you're in what's called Essentials. And the first thing I would do is get out of Essentials. So up here in the top right is a little thing that kind of looks like your screen. It's got like a menu bar and some tools on the left. I would go ahead and click on that, and I would choose Photography. And all this does in this case is it's going to change what tools are out there and set up for you to use in a way that's optimized for photographers. So like when we go in, if you go into like the painting version, you'll notice like a bunch of additional brushes over here up here, and we get brush controls over here. We don't really need those. So we'll be in photography. And we're about to make a bunch of changes to this layout to make it even a little bit better for us. So if you ever need to bring your layout back to where it was, you can also always click reset. So don't feel worried about moving stuff and not being able to find it again. You can always come back and reset that workspace back to what it was, back to its default. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring up my rulers, because I tend to use those quite a bit just for a reference point. And to bring up rulers, you'll hit Command R or Control R, depending on what operating system you're on your keyboard, and some rulers will appear. Similarly, you can also come up to View and just go to Rulers right here. It's good to know the hotkeys. Now you can see that it's showing us the number of pixels. This guy is, 8,600 or so. I don't necessarily want it in pixels. I'll go ahead and right click on it. If I right click on this ruler, I can take it to inches, and that might be a little bit more useful for me if I plan on printing out of this. So it's just a good way to kind of see where you're at, especially if you start cropping or doing things like that. All right, so let's tour our workspace. Over here on the left, we have all of our tools. Across the top, we have our tool controls, and over here on the right, we have our panels. So whenever I click on any one of these tools, you'll notice that my toolbar, my options bar up here will change. And so it's just different options for my tools. So let's say I pick the brush tool and I need to make it bigger. I can click up here and make my brush bigger. Not that we'll be using the brush today, but like it's just an example. So tool, and inside each tool, by the way, you'll notice that some of them have a little caret in the bottom right. So if you click and hold on that caret, there'll be similar tools to that top one underneath it. So like we'll be using a bunch of selections today. So like we'll eventually come down to the rectangular marquee tool, and we'll be playing with some of these smart selection tools underneath the magic wand. Excuse me. At the bottom of our tools bar, by the way, is our swatches, which is our foreground and background color, which when we have something that lays down tone, allows us to pick what color we're putting down. Again, we won't really be using this today, but it's there, just so you know what it is. Now over here on the right is where we're going to do some customization. So this is additional information windows or additional controls for different active tools. For instance, I've got my libraries open, and what libraries is like there's a set of colors that I use a lot, or like I was making a workbook the other day, so I had these pieces in here that I was using between multiple programs for the workbook. I put them in my library, and then I can access them in all of my different Adobe programs. Of course, I'm not going to use them today, so I'm going to go ahead and right click on where it says libraries. I'm going to click close. And that kind of cleans up my workspace a little bit so it's not there. Similarly, I've got a lot of screen real estate because I've got a 27-inch Mac. So I'm just going to go ahead and click these two arrows right here. And that's going to expand out these other panels, which I want access to for editing and kind of doing my work. However, like clone source down here, I'm not going to be using clone source. I'm going to go ahead and right click on clone source and click close. Now, if I want to, I can also click and drag and move some of these panels out. So like I can click on any of these labels and, drop it in between there or drop it up here inside this other grouping. These are all things that are very quick and easy to do just by clicking and dragging around. And then just like with normal windows on a computer, if I mouse over the edges, I can shrink or expand those windows by mousing over and dragging. I can also make them active by clicking on the different labels to make those ones active. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure history is active. I want my navigator over here active. Adjustments is the only one there, and layers is the only one here. And this will be good for today. All right. So let's take a look at some very common edits that you can make in Photoshop to your pictures. So there's 9 million ways to do this, but there is actually a wrong way to make an edit in Photoshop, or a philosophically wrong way. Part of what's really beautiful about Photoshop is that if you edit a certain way, whatever you do is going to be adjustable and or undoable without having to hit the undo button. Like it's reversible. The idea is to make it reversible. And if I don't make it reversible, when I save and close my picture, I can't change my mind later. So like the wrong way to make an edit would be to come up here and go to image and go to adjustments and go to brightness and contrast, because this kind of edit is what we call a global adjustment edit. And it's not going to be undoable. So like once I have it here, like nothing has changed in my layers. This edit is, if I saved and closed, would be permanent. There'd be no way to undo it. Also notice that when I made that edit, by the way, over here in history, a new step appeared. So I have open, and then I have that brightness and contrast edit I made. So I'm going to click back to open to undo that edit. And let's do that same kind of edit, except in a way that's going to be reversible. So there's 3 easy ways to get to what we want to do. We can come up to layer, new adjustment layer, and then pick brightness and contrast. Or over here in our adjustments tab, we can click the brightness and contrast button. Or over here in our layers panel, we can click the half circle thing and also select brightness and contrast. And that's all going to do essentially the same thing. So whichever one you want to do is fine. You know, properties right here is a little small. So I'm going to go ahead and mouse over that line and drag it up a little bit into history so I have a little bit better access to properties. So what properties is when I have a layer active, it's the controls or the properties of that layer. So I have my brightness and contrast layer active by clicking on it. Notice how it's gray right here. This one's active, now that one's active. This changed and I get these controls. So let's go ahead and make it a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this over to 15. I could also type in 15, or I can also type in math equations, believe it or not. So let's say I wanted to make it as a third as bright as 15. If I type in divided by 5, it will drop that to 3 for me. Now, a third of 15 is pretty easy, but you get the idea. Contrast. So contrast allows me to either wash the image out or kind of make it a little bit punchier. And we are going to make it a little bit punchier. I'm going to go ahead and drag this over to 20. So I can see what effect my layer is having by clicking on the eyeball right here. So I can poke it in the eyeball and turn it on and off to see what I've done to it. And since it's a layer, it's always undoable. So like I can either hide it or I can click on this layer and delete it later to make it so it goes away. Again, that first method I showed, you can't undo it once you save and close. This one I can undo after I save and close. The picture looks a little, well, let's go over some other ways to brighten it first. So we have also other ways to brighten it. So we have levels, which is like a very robust brightness and contrast. And then I can set my black points. I can set my white points. So I can make it so I want more of it true white or more of it true black. And then I can say I want my midtones biased dark or I want my midtones biased bright. So this is kind of like a very more refined version of brightness and contrast. And you know what? Let's go ahead and move those levels over. I'm going to put in 0.9. You can always click and drag on this, or you can type it in. Underneath here is where I can say, like, I want my darkest blacks to be not that dark, or I want my brightest whites to be not that white. Generally in photography, you want a full range of tones. You won't really mess with this bottom guy very often. Another way that we can do adjustments is curves. This one a lot of people really love. I'm not going to get too far into it, but basically you can click and drag on this line to add contrast or brighten or darken. And wherever you put these control points is how you'll put anchors on there to make an edit. So this is what we call an S-curve edit, and that's very common. Although in this case, since I already increased the contrast with these other 2 layers, it's not really needed. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this curves layer, either by making sure that this layer is active and hitting the delete key, or clicking the trash can in the bottom right. One last way I can make it brighter is I can click on exposure. This behaves a lot like camera exposure, not exactly, but it's there if you want to do it that way. Generally, most people are going to be using levels and curves to do their brightness adjustments. Now this picture is a little cool, so let's make it a little bit warmer. And so we've got, again, a bunch of really good options for doing that. We have the hue saturation tool, color balance, and then color filter right here. You can also use channel mixer, but this one's a little bit more advanced. So if we grab into hue and saturation, this allows me to change the overall color feel of an image. Like I can say I want to get more towards red, so I drag it more towards red, and you can see that we start getting red tones in there. Similarly, I could target a certain color. So like I could target all those greens in here by clicking where it says master and just going to greens. And that allows me to edit just those green colors. And you can see now that I can like change it around a little bit. So this one's good for targeted edits, but not for this overall edit that I want to make for this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and click in my history up to where I was before I made that layer. So I could also come into color balance, and it balances out 6 colors on 3 sliders. So I can be like, I can add a little bit of red and add a little bit of yellow, and that warms up the image quite well. Look at that, it's very attractive now. So I did +14 and -14. So this is a really easy way to be like, there's too much blue, so I'll add red and yellow instead. I'm going to click the eyeball to hide this guy for a second because I want to show you the other one, the photo filter tool. So if I click on photo filter, it's going to give me old school photo filters for like if you're very familiar with color and black and white photography in film days. You would put a filter in front of your camera lens to adjust for certain lighting situations or to create certain effects. These filters replicate those effects. So like this is a warming 85 filter. You can see that we've got a bunch of other ones kind of hidden away in here. So let's say, I was shooting foliage with black and white. I throw a red filter on there to kind of darken the sky and brighten up the plants. Doesn't work quite that way for this, but like you get the idea. And then we have our density, which is how dense of the filter it is. And it allows you to create color casts based on those. In our case, I really like that color balance. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this photo filter layer. Oop, just deleted the mask. Got to click that trash can again. So I'll click the eyeball to make this visible again. And now we have a very attractive, warmed up image. So let's say that I wanted to only edit a certain portion of this image. So let's say I wanted to edit just that blue color. So if I wanted to change that blue color, say to red, this is where that hue and saturation guy comes into pretty good handiness. So let me see, that's blue. So I'll come to master, I'll go to blues, and then I can just drag this guy over and make it whatever color I want. Now notice that it's picking up some of the tones on his face. So I need to tell it not to pick up those tones. So like we're looking right here on his nose and on his forehead. So notice on each one of these layers is this white rectangle. So what this white rectangle represents is our canvas or our picture on here. And anywhere that I paint black on this, what we call a layer mask, is where I tell it not to affect it. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the regular brush, and your guys' default brush will be this soft round guy, which will be fine. Excuse me. So up here across the top in our options bar, I'm going to click up here and I'm going to drag my size up to, we'll try around 100. Ooh, maybe even bigger than that. It looks pretty small. Yeah, like 180 or 200 will be fine. Then for my colors, I'm going to make sure black is active on top. So if yours is white on top, click this little double arrow guy to put black on top. And then make sure you have the hue saturation layer active. And not only do you have it active, but you have a little box around this white box. And that's telling me that I'm going to be painting there rather than on the background or anywhere else. So when I paint over the nose now, it drops it back down to that original color. Now, if I didn't have this area active, if I had the background active and I started painting, I get whatever color I happen to have active. So, it doesn't work correctly. So whatever layer is active is the layer or area that you'll be painting on. And you can even see right here, the little black mark preview, where that layer mask that I've added to this is. So those layer masks tie into something that we call selections. So let's say I wanted to turn this into a birthday cake. So let's zoom out and take a look at it. So to zoom out, I could click on the magnifying glass and then click and drag on here, or I could, click any of these buttons up here to do these kind of nice zooms. So like I've got plus mode, which allows me to click to zoom in, negative mode to zoom out, click and drag to zoom, or these other single button clicks to set my size. Those are cool, but I'd rather do this by hotkey. So on your keyboard, you can hit Command plus to zoom in. And when you're zoomed in, if you want to access a different part of the image, you can hold down the space bar, no matter what tool you've got active. And now you can click and drag on the image, to change where you're looking. And then if I wanted to zoom out, I can hit Command minus to zoom out. And I can also hit Command or Control 0 to fit it onto my screen. So I'm going to hit Command 0 to fit it onto my screen. Now I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can kind of see the whole thing a little bit better. Ooh, yeah, you can see that there's some little stuff right there. I should probably mask out on that hue saturation layer that was hiding under the chat window. Anyway, so why don't we turn this into a birthday card? So to turn this into a birthday card, let's bring in a cupcake. So I'm going to come up here and go to File, Open. And I'm going to navigate to my cupcake, and click OK. Now, if I just copy and paste this cupcake over right now, I'm going to bring in this background and this hand. And I only want to bring in the cupcake. So we need to make something called a selection. So up here in the top left, we have our marquee selection tool, which just draws a rectangle. And that allows me to say, I want everything that's in that rectangle. So I could, cut it out if I wanted to. Or let's say I was using that brush tool, this brush will only affect where that selection is. Not very useful for getting this cupcake out of there, but useful at other times. If I click and hold on that marquee tool, I get the elliptical tool, which, spoiler, draws a circle. So to get rid of this marquee one, I'm going to hit Command or Control D to deselect. I could also come up to select and hit deselect up in this menu. And I get a rectangle, or not a rectangle, an oval or a circle, depending on how I click and drag. Command Z to undo. So not super useful for this case. Under the next tool down, so the third tool, is I have the polygonal lasso tool, which allows me to draw lines that I can then form into a selection. So if I wanted to kind of draw a very geometric outline of this, I could come through and kind of do this weird little geometric outline of this guy. But again, not going to be super successful for this. If I click and hold on the polygonal lasso tool, I can see that there's also a regular lasso tool, which is a freehand version of it where I can click and drag around and try to very detailed draw in there. Again, not going to be very fruitful for us. If I click and hold on there again, I get the magnetic lasso tool, which if I zoom in, actually can be quite successful for this, although it's not going to be our fastest option. And basically you click once and you drag your mouse around an edge that you want to select. You can drop new selection points to kind of help refine where like corners and stuff are. And again, it's just going to try to find edges for you. Not what we need in this case though. Next down, so fourth tool, we have the Magic Wand tool. The Magic Wand tool allows me to select broad swaths of tone based on a tolerance. And so you can see anywhere that I click, it's going to try to grab everything that's kind of like that tone. So I can grab everything that's kind of like this teal, or everything that's kind of like this yellow, kind of like this brown. And it can be very useful. In this case, again, not what we're after. So I'm going to click and hold on the Magic Wand tool, and then I get the two that we want. We have the object selection tool and the quick selection tool. Quick selection turns your mouse into a brush, and you just literally click and drag over anything that you want, and it is selected. Now notice when I use the quick select tool, if we zoom in, we can see that we got a little bit of the hand. So I want to remove this part of the selection. So I can either click the minus brush up here to switch my brush to remove mode, remove selection, or I can also hold down the Alt or Option key on my keyboard and then click and drag over the area I don't want, and it intelligently removes it for me. Again, I'm going to zoom out using Command 0 to fit it onto the screen. So this would be a very successful selection. And hit Command D. However, even faster than that would be to use the Object Select tool, and you just draw a rectangle around what you want, and it spits out a selection for you. And you can see that we got that little bit of area down there again. So I'm going to hold down the minus key, and there we go. The minus key, and then I clicked and dragged over that area. The object selection tool is new for this year, and it is terrifyingly good. All right, so let's bring this over. So I'm going to hit Command or Control C on my keyboard to copy this. And then up here, I've got a tab labeled regular editing for my other picture. I'm going to click on that tab. And I'm going to hit Command V to place it in place. And there we have our cupcake. I'm going to click our very first tool that looks like a cross of 4 arrows. And I'm going to then click and drag my cupcake on top of, this is Lee the puppy, on top of his head. And then I'm going to make it a little bit bigger by coming up to Edit, Free Transform. And I get these little bounding box controls that allow me to click and drag to make it bigger. So now he's got a cupcake hat. Let's add a little bit of text on there. So we have Mr. Text tool right here. Click text tool, and across the bottom, I can click and drag an area that I want to add text to. And I can say, happy birthday, Mr. Lee. And you know, it's pretty hard to read right now. So I'm gonna hit Command or Control A to select all of my text while still in my text layer. And let's make you bigger. 72 is not going to be nearly big enough, so I don't know, like 200. 200 is a little big. You can transform this another way, but it's good to see that you can use this toolbar to make that adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and center that text in that box, and let's change the color. So I got a little black box right here. I double click on that black box, and I get one of the most powerful tools in Photoshop called Color Picker. And Color Picker is pretty amazing. So in Color Picker, I have a way of controlling color by clicking on these different radio boxes. So I can do brightness, I can do saturation or hue. So let's change the color up to here. And my brightness is 0, so I need to drag that up to start getting some color. And I need my saturation up as well to start getting colors. Conversely, I can also just click anywhere in here and that also works. So I don't know, let's pick a nice light blue. Click OK. And I'm just going to click off to the side and grab my move tool and move it down a little bit. And there we go. Happy birthday, Mr. Lee. Now there's some other things that you'll want to be able to do in Photoshop. So what we haven't covered yet is how to remove things. So I'm going to come up to File, Open, and I'm going to grab the one labeled Landscape Crabs and click Open. Let me switch it so you can see, there it is, share. So here's the picture. So what we want to do is remove this drone. I'm not going to get into some of the edits that we could do in Lightroom, or Adobe Camera Raw. Just make sure that, again, you've got your settings for importing correct, either like Adobe RGB or sRGB or ProPhoto RGB, depending on your desired output, and 16 bits. Then I'm going to click Open. That said, again, most of these adjustments you can kind of do over here if you want. So this drone is cool, but if we zoom in, so Command or Control plus, and then I'm going to hit the space bar to click and drag, you can see that it's out of focus. So, you know, like maybe not worth keeping that drone in there. Maybe we should keep this landscape. So I'm going to hit Command minus a few times to zoom out a little bit and look at this drone. So just like with selections, there's a lot of ways to remove this guy. The first one we have is the Spot Healing Brush tool, which looks like a Band-Aid with a circle hiding behind it. So if I click on that, I get a little brush. And right now this brush is tiny. It's not useful. And you can kind of see that like it removes little bits of things off here, but it's not being very good. So I'm going to click back to Open to restore this back to where it was. So I need to make that brush bigger. And I can either make it bigger by clicking up here in the top left and dragging my size up, or if I right click with my mouse, I get that same menu. I'm just going to make this bigger. Yeah, about 200 seems to be the golden size for us today. And anywhere where I click, it will try to remove whatever I'm clicking, but I can also click and drag to paint over an area. And so what this tool is doing is that it's looking at the area that you've painted over, and it's looking at everything around it and going, you know what, dude? I think this is what you actually want here. So check this. And like magic, it will, oops, had a little blip down there, remove it. And I'm just gonna paint over that little blip and it's gone. If I hit Command 0, you know, this doesn't look perfect. Like there's other ways that I can kind of try to improve this removal as well. So I'm gonna click back to Open, And I am going to click on the Band-Aid without the circle behind it, which is the regular healing brush tool. Now, if I come down here and I just try to click, I get this, you need to option click to define source point, blah, 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 blah thing, which is like, what's this is all about? So what this tool is going to do is it's going to allow you to copy from an area, but it's also going to look at the stuff directly around where you're painting over and combine the copying area and the area around it to make a better image. So let's say I want to copy from right here. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and I get a little crosshair, and I'll click once and then release the Alt key to return back to the brush. And you can see now that that area that I clicked on is now previewing inside my brush. And so, you know, like I've got this edge right there, and if I line that up, it's going to give kind of a nice little realistic overlap. So I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to start painting over this drone. And you can see how that kind of brought over this area and over here to make it a little bit more realistic. So it's very, it's very useful, very neat. And I'm going to undo it for now, though. After that, I get the patch tool. So just like with that lasso tool we were using earlier, this is a click and drag around to draw a line around something. And it will turn it into a selection. And notice now when I mouse over it, my patch tool gets an arrow next to it. So if I click and drag, I can be like, I would like to copy this area over, and then hit Command D, and you can see how it brought over that area. And then I'd have to come in and clean these edges up because they're a little sharp right now. Boink. After that, I have the content aware move tool, which is kind of the opposite idea of the patch tool. So this allows me to pick this up and drop it somewhere else. You know, it's not perfect, but it's cool and it's interesting. And you can see how it's trying to blend those edges for me. Again, it's not a perfect tool yet. The only other tool that you can use to remove stuff, and this one's kind of the masochistic version of it, and it's from the ancient original versions of Photoshop, is the clone tool. And it's just like that healing brush tool where you're going to clone from an area. So if I hold down the Alt key, I can say clone from here. You can see that it previews it. And when I paint over, it's not going to do any of that smart blending for me that the healing brush tool did. Now, believe it or not, we still have another way to remove stuff. So let's say I had something very complicated. I could use any of these selection tools. So why don't we go ahead and try that object selection tool. I haven't actually tried it on this guy yet. And object select that drone. Ooh, it's thinking about it. It's having a little bit of trouble. Actually, this wouldn't turn out very well, because if we zoom in, we can see the object select did an okay job grabbing this, but it didn't grab those blurs from the blades. So I'm actually going to come back to the lasso tool, and I'm just going to quickly, lazily, lamely drag around over this so I've got it. So I can also remove stuff using content aware fill. So if I go up to file and I come, edit, and I go to fill or content aware fill, I can have Photoshop intelligently remove and blend this area. I'm not going to open up content aware fill because it's resource intensive and it will take a hot minute to do its thing. But we can do the same idea with regular fill. And then where it says contents, I can click on black and say content aware and click OK. And it will take a hot second to think, and then it will delete that object for me. Command D, and you can see that this one gave the best results. It often does. But sometimes it doesn't work well. So like it will draw in stuff from other areas. It will copy things in poorly. In this case, it was the right one to use. And that's why we need to look at and know all these different content aware removal styles, because you have to know which ones will work well for you. So like sometimes you'll have a line that you need to preserve. And so I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to space bar down. I'm going to come down over here to this railroad track, and there's this little control box right here that is just not doing it for me in this picture. So this is where having a little bit more control with something like the healing brush tool can be very useful. So I'll shrink my brush down. So I right click to get a smaller brush. 50 looks pretty good. I'm going to hold down the Alt key right about here and click. And you can see that I get a preview of that railroad track. And I'm going to line up the railroad with where it should be. And I'm just gonna kind of quickly paint over that thing that I want to remove, and it allows me to do a much better job without having to fuss around than I would with some of the other tools. Like let's also get rid of the, whatever that is, fire hydrant, I don't know. Oh, it's a center point spigot maybe? You get the idea. Oh, stop sign, you have displeased Stalin, so you get removed. There's a very, very famous picture of a guy who displeases Stalin. He gets photoshopped out back before it was Photoshop. Let's say these trees have also offended Stalin, so we'll hold down the Alt key and click here, line up that horizon line, and just paint these bad boys out. You're now in a gulag somewhere. Sorry, trees. Command 0 to fit the screen, and it's just like magic. It's all gone. So now what? What do you do with these files? You've got to save them. So when you save these files, you'll come up to File, and you'll go to File, Save As, and you'll get a window that looks like this, which isn't the most useful window in the world. So I would click this little drop-down arrow, and it allows you to have your full file management system to save it wherever you want. In my case, I'm going to save these to my desktop, because I'm going to delete them right after this. You can type in the name right here. You can add file tags to it for searchability if you want. I'm not going to. And we're going to save it here on my desktop. So right across the bottom, we have what's called Format. So right now it says Photoshop. You want to save your original edits in Photoshop. You save them in Photoshop, you keep your layers. And then there's no conversions. It will keep your color space, it'll keep your bit depth, all of the information will stay good. The only thing that you will lose is your history. So you'll lose the ability to use the undo button. But if you have all of your edits down here as layers, then you can just turn the layer on and off or delete the layer. However, Photoshop files are not good for pretty much anything else. So you'll click on where it says Photoshop, and we've got a bunch of these other options. And so some of the highlights would be JPEG. So JPEG will convert your image to 8-bit, and it will compress your image and make it very easy to share on the internet. So if you're going to be uploading your stuff to like Instagram or Facebook or whatever, save a picture as a JPEG for that upload. So like a very common workflow for me will be to save my original PSD, and then I'll save my JPEG for uploading to the internet. Photoshop, portable document file, PDF. Hopefully everyone knows what PDFs are. Again, like if for some reason a JPEG just isn't gonna work, you can send a PDF if you really want to. It's not worth getting into the advantages or difference in PDFs for us today, but you can save it as a PDF. PNG, on the internet, you'll read a lot of people saying that you should save stuff as PNGs. The advantages of PNGs just aren't worth it for us. They're gonna make for gargantuan files that take a long time to send and load. And what you're getting out of it isn't worth it. So I would not save stuff as PNGs. PNGs are really optimized for certain types of web icons and things that need alpha layer transparency on the internet. But since it's a lossless 16-bit format, it can, but often not, display pictures better. Because again, a lot of people's screens just aren't that good. And it's huge. So like, you're gonna have a way bigger file size than JPEG, and it takes a long time to send things. Bitmap, we don't really use these anymore, so don't worry about that. TIFF is really good for sending to printers. So like if a printer has the option of you sending him a TIFF, send him a TIFF. It's basically it's not 100%, but it's like the everyman's version of a PSD file. So like it keeps a lot of that, it keeps that color information and bit depth in there for you, and it's good from printing from as a result. So select whatever file formats you want based on your needs. Again, a really good rule of thumb is you save a PSD for your original, and then you'll save a JPEG for internet. Now, right now, this image is gargantuan. So if I was actually going to save this as a JPEG, I'd want to make it smaller first. So let's say if I right click on my ruler and go to pixels, we can see down here in the bottom left that this is 8,688 pixels wide. No one has a screen this big. So I don't, and it's going to be a large file. So why would I want to upload this to the internet? I need to resize it. So this is where I come up to image and I'll go to image size. And again, I'll do this after I've saved my PSD because what I'm about to do isn't reversible after I save and close. So I'll save my PSD. And then when I'm getting ready to do my JPEG, I'm going to do these edits that are just for the JPEG. This resizing is just for the JPEG. So I'll click image size. I get this magic little window and it allows me to set in some target sizes. So basically what I can do is I can come down to resolution. If you're going to be printing, 300 is a really good resolution to be at. If it's going to be going onto the web, 72 works very well. And you can see how it's already making this a little bit smaller. And then for most websites, anywhere from 900 to 1200 pixels is plenty in size. And the beauty of doing these smaller sizes, so I tend to do 900 pixels, is that it makes it so somebody will have a very bad time of saving your image and printing it off to, you know, steal or whatever or sell. If somebody wants to use it in a digital advertisement, it's still big enough for that, unfortunately. But if you're uploading stuff to the internet, there isn't a way to prevent that. So 900 by 600, so 900 on the longest side, is a really good size for keeping your work safe on the internet, but it's not perfect. I can change it, by the way, to any of these other sizes. Like if I wanted to do inches or if I wanted to do centimeters, like they're all available to me. Right here where it says resample, this is where it's going to be redoing that resolution based on the new pixel density. This is complicated. Just leave resample on for now and don't worry too much about it unless you're going to be doing a lot of printing. If you're going to be doing a lot of printing, you'll want to read up on how that works. Next to resample, there's automatic. And for most of us, automatic is going to work just fine as long as we're making it smaller. If you're trying to enlarge your image, then you're going to care a lot more about these different ones because it's going to change how detail gets distorted as it gets enlarged. For reduction, it's almost always going to pick bicubic sharper, which is good for reduction. So then you click OK, and your image is now quite a bit smaller. So then you would come to File, Save As, and you would save your JPEG on your desktop. And when you save for the JPEG, it's going to be like must save as a copy. That's fine. You'll also get this JPEG options window. Don't worry too much about the difference between baseline and baseline optimized and progressive. It doesn't matter too much. And then since we resized this down to 900 pixels, this slider right here isn't going to have a drastic effect on how large the image is. So I would go ahead and just drag it all the way up to quality 12 for maximum quality, because if you do these lower ones, you'll start getting artifacts and grossness in your image that look really bad. So you could do larger file right here and then click OK, and it will save a JPEG for you on your desktop for you to access and use. Then to close out of stuff, you can click the little X to make it go away. Click Don't Save. For the cupcake, I'm going to click my little X and make it go away. And we have our Lee the birthday boy. You know what? I went a little bit faster today. So let's pop open my notes and see if there's anything else I want to grab and cover real quick. Yeah, all right, let's talk a little bit about some graphic design additions that can be nice. So like our happy birthday, Mr. Lee, is a little hard to read. So I'm going to come up here to that marquee tool, and I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee. And I'm just going to click and drag around happy birthday, Mr. Lee. Then I'm going to click this little plus sign right here for a new empty layer, and I can do whatever I want with this layer. So I'm going to grab this paintbrush. I'm going to right click to make my paintbrush bigger. I'm just going to paint this in black. And notice how it's covering up happy birthday, Mr. Lee right now. That's fine. The reason why it's doing it is because this little layer that I made, of course, is above that happy birthday, Mr. Lee layer. So if I click and drag this layer down below happy birthday, Mr. Lee, it's now behind it. And it makes it way easier to read that title. Now, if I wanted to be a little bit even classier, I can change the opacity of this layer. So opacity is how transparent or see-through that layer is. And I can control that by selecting a layer, so it's active. And then right here where it says opacity, I can click and drag down to change how transparent it is. You know, if we drop this down to 50% or so, we can see some of the background through it. Maybe, yeah, 65% actually looks pretty good there. And it kind of adds a little bit of emphasis and a little bit of design to that. Again, there's a lot of improvements to design that we could do to this, and we could start trying to match in Mr. Cupcake in here a little bit better. But that's, you know, when we're going to start getting a little bit more advanced. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. So if you guys have any questions, this is your chance. Like, how do I do X in Photoshop? Is whatever a good workflow? This is your chance. Ask away if you have it. Otherwise, I will call the workshop for the night. So anyone have any good questions? It's like Jeopardy music playing. All right, well, if we don't have any questions, all right, we do have a question. Must be coming from Facebook. Oh, I see, it's in the Q&A thing instead of chat. I almost missed that one, Kendra. If I wanted Mr. Lee on a different background and I needed to make property edits such as hue saturation, etc., what would be the correct workflow? So instead of copying that cupcake out of there, what we would do is use those same kind of selection tools to pull Mr. Lee out of there. So like I could grab my object select tool and see if it will grab Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, by the way, will be a very, very, very difficult thing to select well. So you can see here, I'm starting to pick up some of those plants. So I might also just grab that rectangular marquee tool and I'll click the subtract selection button and I'll just cut him off at the bottom like so. And now I've got just Mr. Lee. And then I can copy and paste him into wherever I want to drop him. Now, when I make an edit, as long as whatever edit layer I'm making is above my Mr. Lee, I can change that. So let's say I wanted to just darken, say I wanted to do those edits again, so I can come into levels and, you know, we would drag this guy over a little bit to add in some contrast. And you can see that I'm affecting the whole image. If I only wanted to affect that Mr. Lee that I picked up, I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key on my keyboard, and then I'm going to click in between those two layers, and that allows me to tell Photoshop I only want to edit that one layer. So you'll copy and paste him onto any background that you want, and you can then, from there, make any adjustments to the background or just Mr. Lee to change his appearance. So let's say I wanted to add a warm filter to this whole thing, or warm the whole thing. I'd come over to color balance, you know, I'd increase the red again, and I'd increase the yellow again. And you can see how it's only affecting Mr. Lee. It's because I've got that, hey, this guy thing still going. So, you know, actually I need to drag it above levels. There we go. And I'll hold down that Alt Option key and click in between it again, and now it will affect the whole image. Ooh, it's a little too much yellow, a little too much. There we go. And you know, why don't we move him down to the bottom so he fits in there? Does that answer your question, Kendra? I mean, like, we only have a hot minute here, but basically select him, copy and paste him into the background that you want, and then make any edits to the whole image or part of the image that can allow you to make it appear like what you want. Can I explain layer order more? Sure. If for people who are familiar with traditional animation, so think about like Scooby-Doo. In Scooby-Doo, there's a background layer that nothing moves on, although sometimes they'll move the background layer around when they're walking to create the illusion of movement. And then over that layer, they'll have clear pieces of plastic that they've painted those characters on to lay them over that background. And then that's how they create that illusion of depth without having to repaint everything at once. They can just repaint that character. Then suppose that they want to turn that into a night scene, but they don't want to have to kind of think about how to do all that coloring. If they take a piece of clear blue plastic and lay that over it, it's now all tinted blue. And so that's a way of thinking about layers as well. So like this background layer is just like that background in Scooby-Doo. This Mr. Lee right here is just like Scooby in that Scooby-Doo cartoon. And then these levels adjustments and color balance adjustments are just like clear pieces of plastic or anything else like that that gets laid over all of those layers. So it's like a stack of, it's like an animation stack is the easiest way to think about it. or like a stack of paper where everything's clear until you put something on it. Does that make a lot of sense? Is that a good metaphor for you, Kendra? Ah, right, very good. Thank you very much. If we don't have any other questions, I will go ahead and call it for the night. All right, it's been a pleasure. I always enjoy teaching these. And again, this video will be available for you guys to watch again if you want on Facebook. And that Dropbox link does stay good for quite a while. So if you want to download the files and practice, they are there for you to download and practice with. Have a good night, everyone.